It was a Monday in October when a man named George Finney, a retired postal worker with a passion for amateur mycology, found the bag. He was walking a little-used deer trail deep in the Angeles National Forest, a place he came to every autumn in search of chanterelles. The bag, a designer leather tote from the brand Kate Spade, was snagged on a low-hanging manzanita branch, its cheerful pink color a shocking anomaly against the muted browns and greens of the forest floor. George almost walked past it. He was focused on the damp earth, his eyes scanning for the telltale golden trumpets of his quarry. But the color was just too loud, too out of place. He stopped, nudged it with the toe of his boot, and then, with a sigh of resignation, bent down to pull it free. It was surprisingly heavy. Inside, nestled amongst a wallet, a tube of expensive lipstick, and a set of car keys, was a driver's license. The face on the license was that of a smiling young woman. Her name listed as Amelia Vance, age 28. There were credit cards, a laminated employee badge for a downtown architecture firm, and a smartphone, its screen dark and lifeless. There was no sign of a struggle, no obvious bloodstains. It was as if someone had simply set it down and walked away. But nobody walks away from a $2,000 handbag in the middle of a national forest. This is not just the story of a lost bag. It is the story of how the most modern tools of human connection, dating apps, social media, the endless promise of a digital soulmate, were twisted into a sophisticated hunting apparatus. It is the story of an apex predator who moved not through the forest, but through the ether, a chameleon who crafted perfect identities to lure intelligent, successful, and hopeful women into a trap from which almost no one had ever escaped. And it is, ultimately, the story of the one woman who did, a woman whose intelligence and resilience would turn the predator into prey, unmasking a monster and bringing a silent, multi-state reign of terror to a stunning and definitive end. Her name was Dr. Alaina Hayes. Dr. Alaina Hayes, at 42, was a pediatric oncologist at Children's Hospital Los Angeles. She was a person defined by a quiet, fierce compassion. Her colleagues described her as the calm center of the storm, a physician who could deliver the most devastating news with a gentleness that somehow left families feeling supported rather than shattered. She possessed a rare combination of clinical brilliance and profound empathy. She had built a life of purpose and gentle routine. Her days were long and demanding, filled with the emotional weight of her work. Her evenings were her sanctuary. She lived in a modest but beautiful craftsman bungalow in Pasadena, a home she had shared with her husband, Ben, for 15 years. They had restored it together, board by board, a testament to their shared patience and love. Ben, a landscape architect, had been her anchor. He was the one who understood the toll her job took, the one who could make her laugh after a day spent in the shadow of childhood illness. He was her other half, the quiet gardener to her driven healer. 2 years prior, that anchor had been ripped away. Ben was killed in a senseless car accident, struck by a drunk driver while cycling home from a client's house. The loss was absolute, a cataclysm that hollowed out the world Alaina had so carefully built. The vibrant colors of her life seemed to fade to gray. For the first year, she simply survived. She threw herself into her work, finding a grim solace in the structured chaos of the hospital. Her friends, a tight-knit group led by her closest confidant, a university professor named Sarah Jenkins, formed a protective circle around her. They brought her meals, dragged her out for walks, and sat with her in silence when words were useless. By the second year, the sharp edges of grief had begun to soften, replaced by a vast and echoing loneliness. The house was too quiet. The garden Ben had so lovingly tended was still beautiful, but looking at it brought a pang of sorrow. Alaina was a caregiver by nature, but now there was no one at home to care for. and no one to care for her. Section, at Sarah's gentle but persistent urging, Alaina finally agreed to try and re-enter the world. The idea of dating felt alien, almost a betrayal, but the loneliness was a physical presence, a cold weight in her chest. She was 42, childless, and a widow. The prospect of finding love again seemed impossibly remote. She downloaded a dating app called Lux Connect. It was not one of the mainstream swipe-heavy platforms. Lux Connect marketed itself as a more exclusive, curated experience for established professionals. It required a subscription fee and a vetting process, which gave Alaina a false sense of security. It felt safer, more civilized. For a few weeks, she browsed profiles with a detached curiosity. They were a parade of predictable archetypes: divorced finance guys posing with their sports cars, surgeons in scrubs, lawyers in front of bookcases. Nothing felt authentic. Nothing sparked even a flicker of interest. She was about to delete the app, convinced the experiment was a failure. And then she saw his profile. His name was Julian Croft. The first photo was a candid shot of a man in his mid-40s, handsome in a rugged, understated way. He was leaning against a vintage Land Rover, a genuine, easy smile on his face, with the Scottish Highlands rolling away behind him. He wasn't preening for the camera. He looked caught in a moment of contentment. His bio was just as captivating. It was well-written, intelligent, and tinged with a self-deprecating humor. He described himself as a reformed adrenaline junkie who had traded a career in British Special Forces for the quieter life of an angel investor in green technology. He was, he wrote, a widower. His wife had passed away from cancer 3 years ago. Every detail seemed to be a mirror of Alaina's own desires and experiences. He was successful, but not boastful. He was adventurous, but grounded. He understood loss. It was as if a novelist had crafted a character specifically designed to capture her heart. She felt a hesitant flutter of hope, a feeling so unfamiliar she almost didn't recognize it. With a deep breath, she liked his profile. Within an hour, he responded. His first message was simple, polite, and referenced a detail from her profile, a photo of her hiking in the Sierra Nevada. "A fellow mountain enthusiast, I see," he wrote, "though I suspect the California sun is a bit more reliable than the Scottish mist." The connection was immediate and electric. Their initial messages quickly evolved from polite pleasantries into long, in-depth conversations that stretched late into the night. It felt less like getting to know a stranger and more like reconnecting with a long-lost friend. Julian, as he called himself, was a master communicator. He employed a technique that psychologists call love bombing. The volume of his attention was overwhelming. He sent good morning texts the moment she woke up and good night messages just before she fell asleep. Throughout the day, a constant stream of communication flowed from him. Links to articles he thought she'd find interesting, photos of his day, thoughtful questions about her work. He crafted his persona with surgical precision. He told her he was born in England, but had spent years traveling the world, first with the military and then for business. This explained his slightly unplaceable accent and his lack of deep local roots. He mirrored her interests perfectly. When she mentioned her love for classical music, he would send her a link to a Yo-Yo Ma performance, commenting on the cellist's sublime technique. When she spoke of her passion for oncology, he would ask insightful, empathetic questions about her research. The most powerful tool in his arsenal was his feigned vulnerability. A few days into their correspondence, he shared the story of his late wife, Eleanor. He described her battle with ovarian cancer in heartbreaking detail, his guilt over being away on business trips during her treatment, his profound loneliness after her death. The story was a mirror of Alaina's own grief for Ben. It created an instant, powerful bond of shared trauma. "I feel like I've been in a fog for 3 years," He texted her one night. "Talking to you is the first time I've seen the sun." Alaina read the message with tears in her eyes. She felt the same way. She was falling, and falling fast. She told Sarah about him over coffee one Saturday. "He's just perfect," Alaina said, a blush rising on her cheeks. "It's almost too good to be true." Sarah, ever the pragmatist, raised an eyebrow. "Have you video chatted with him yet?" Elena's smile faltered slightly. "No, not yet. He's been traveling for work. He's in Singapore this week. The time difference is a nightmare. And he said the camera on his laptop is broken. He was really apologetic about it." This was the first red flag. It was small, easily dismissed, and accompanied by a plausible excuse. Julian was always traveling. When he was supposedly in London, his hotel Wi-Fi was unreliable. When he was in Dubai, his phone had fallen and cracked the camera lens. There was always a reason, and Alaina, caught in the intoxicating glow of the new connection, accepted it. Confirmation bias was a powerful force. She wanted to believe he was real, so she overlooked the inconsistencies. The grooming process was systematic. He was building a foundation of trust and intense emotional dependency before they ever met. The hundreds of text messages, the shared secrets, the declarations of affection, they were all bricks in the wall he was constructing around her. After 3 weeks of constant communication, Julian told her he was finally flying back to the United States. He was desperate to meet her in person. He suggested a first date, not a simple coffee, but a dinner at Providence, one of Los Angeles's most exclusive and expensive seafood restaurants. It was a grand gesture designed to impress. The night of the date, Alaina was a bundle of nerves and excitement. She hadn't felt this way since she was a teenager. She chose her dress carefully, a simple but elegant navy blue sheath. She did her hair, put on makeup, rituals she had long since abandoned. She arrived at the restaurant and gave the maitre d' his name. She was led to a quiet corner table where he was already waiting. He stood up as she approached, and her breath caught in her throat. He was even more handsome than his pictures. Tall, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, with the same warm, crinkling eyes from his profile picture. He smiled, and the entire world seemed to slow down. "Alaina," he said, his voice a smooth baritone with a faint British inflection. "You are even more beautiful in person." The date was flawless. He was charming, witty, and an excellent listener. He asked about her day, her patience, her life, with an attentiveness that made her feel like the only person in the world. He spoke of his own life with the same practiced narrative from their texts, adding small, convincing details. He perfectly matched the man she had spent 3 weeks falling for online. Any lingering doubts she might have had evaporated in the warmth of his presence. As he walked her to her car, he gently took her hand. "I know this is fast," he said, his expression serious. "But I feel like I've known you my entire life. I'm already falling in love with you, Alaina." He leaned in and gave her a soft, lingering kiss. Driving home, Alaina felt a sense of elation she thought she would never experience again. The loneliness that had been her constant companion for 2 years was gone, replaced by a dazzling, terrifying hope. It was not too good to be true. It was real. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind romance. Julian swept her off her feet. There were lavish dinners, weekend trips to Napa Valley, box seats at the LA Philharmonic. He was attentive, generous, and deeply romantic. He seemed to want to spend every free moment with her. But the red flags, though subtle, continued to accumulate. He never invited her to his home. He claimed to have a penthouse apartment in Century City, but he always had an excuse for why they couldn't go there. It was being renovated. The building had a strict policy against overnight guests. His housekeeper was a very private person. They always stayed at her house or at luxury hotels, which he always paid for. He was also curiously absent from the internet, aside from his dating profile. For a supposed tech investor, he had no social media presence, no LinkedIn, no Facebook, no Instagram. He claimed it was for security reasons, a holdover from his special forces days. "You learn to value your privacy," he'd said with a knowing look. "The less of a digital footprint you leave, the safer you are." The explanation was both flattering and chilling, implying a world of danger that made him seem all the more exciting. Sarah was not convinced. "Something is off, Alaina," she said one afternoon. "It's all too perfect, too smooth. It's like he's a character in a movie. Nobody is that flawless." Alaina grew defensive. "You're just being cynical," she retorted, more sharply than she intended. "You don't know him. He's been through a lot. He just values his privacy. I do too." Sarah backed off, but her concern was a seed of doubt planted in Alaina's mind. Alaina tried to ignore it. She loved the way Julian made her feel. She loved feeling adored, desired, and safe. She pushed the inconsistencies to the back of her mind, chalking them up to his unique background and her own lingering trust issues. She was choosing to believe in the fantasy because the reality of her loneliness was too painful to contemplate. The relationship escalated. 3 months after their first date, Julian told her he loved her and wanted to build a future with her. He spoke of marriage, of traveling the world together, of finally having a home that was theirs. He was selling her the future she had lost with Ben. Then came the next phase of the operation. He began to subtly weave in stories of a major business deal he was working on, a complex international acquisition of a solar energy company. It was the culmination of his life's work, he said, a deal that would not only make them financially secure for life, but would also do immense good for the planet. He made her feel like a partner in this grand venture, asking for her opinions and celebrating small victories along the way. One evening, he arrived at her house looking stressed and dejected. He explained that a critical part of the deal was about to fall through. A short-term financing partner had unexpectedly pulled out, leaving a temporary but critical gap in funding. It was, he explained, a simple cash flow issue. He needed to raise $250,000 within 48 hours to keep the deal from collapsing. He was deeply apologetic, embarrassed even. "I am so sorry to even be telling you this," he said, running a hand through his hair. "It's a humiliating position to be in. My own funds are tied up in offshore accounts that I can't access in time. It's a bureaucratic nightmare. I'll have the money back in 2 weeks, with interest, of course. I wouldn't even ask, but this is everything we've been talking about, our future." This was a different kind of test, far more significant than the first date. It was a test of trust measured in dollars. Alaina's logical, analytical mind, the mind of a doctor, kicked in. It was a huge sum of money. The story was convoluted. It was a massive red flag waving in her face. But her emotional mind, the mind of a lonely widow who had been systematically groomed for 3 months, was more powerful. She looked at the man she loved, who looked so defeated and vulnerable. He wasn't asking for himself. He was asking for them, for their future. Rejecting his plea would feel like rejecting him, rejecting the beautiful life he had promised her. She had the money. The inheritance from Ben's life insurance was sitting in a savings account. She made the decision that would seal her fate. "Of course," she said, her voice steady. "I'll help. We're a team." The look of relief and gratitude on his face was so profound, so loving, that it erased any doubt she had. She had done the right thing. The next day, she transferred the money to an overseas bank account number he provided. The 2 weeks passed, then 3. The money did not reappear in her account. Julian's excuses became more elaborate. There were international banking holidays, security holds, unforeseen legal challenges. He was always apologetic, always reassuring her the money was coming any day now. The love bombing intensified, as if to compensate for the financial delay. He was more attentive than ever, showering her with affection and promises. But Alaina was a scientist. She dealt in data and evidence. The evidence was not good. The man she loved was either incredibly unlucky or a liar. And for the first time, she allowed herself to seriously consider the second possibility. Her trust, once a solid foundation, had become a hairline fracture. She started to do her own quiet investigation. She remembered the name of the German model whose picture he had used on his dating profile, something she'd discovered in a fleeting moment of curiosity months ago via a reverse image search, a finding he had smoothly explained away as a mistake by the app's algorithm. She looked him up again. The model had an active Instagram account filled with pictures of his life in Berlin with his wife and children. He was not Julian Croft. The fracture in her trust cracked wide open. Her blood ran cold. Who was this man sleeping in her bed? The man who held her hand and told her he loved her? Who had her $250,000? Her mind raced, reevaluating every conversation, every shared intimacy, every perfect moment. It had all been a lie. The shared grief, the tailored interests, the tragic backstory. It was all a script. But this was the moment Alaina Hayes was different. Panic and fear were there, but beneath them, the cool, analytical mind of Dr. Hayes took over. She was not dealing with a cheating boyfriend or a simple con man. The level of sophistication, the psychological manipulation, the sheer audacity of the fraud, it pointed to something far more dangerous. He hadn't just taken her money, he had colonized her life. She knew she couldn't confront him. He was living in her house. He knew her routine, her friends, her vulnerabilities. If he was capable of this level of deception, what else was he capable of? She felt a primal fear. She was in a cage with a predator, and he didn't even know she'd seen his claws. She had to play along. She had to continue the performance of the loving, trusting girlfriend while she figured out what to do. Alaina Hayes, the victim, was gone. In her place was Alaina Hayes, the investigator. She shifted from a state of emotional vulnerability to one of cold, calculating observation. Her home was no longer a sanctuary, it was a laboratory, and her subject was the man who called himself Julian Croft. She began to gather data. She pretended to be more in love than ever, more trusting. She stopped asking about the money, telling him she knew he was handling it, and she trusted him completely. This disarmed him. He relaxed. He grew careless. She watched him. She noted the way he always kept his personal laptop and burner phone with him, never letting them out of his sight. She observed his sleep schedule, his eating habits, the meticulous way he cleaned up after himself, leaving no stray hairs, no fingerprints. It was the behavior of a man who was professionally trained to leave no trace. Section 1 afternoon, while he was in the shower, she took the biggest risk of her life. She walked into the living room where he had left his laptop open on the coffee table. Her heart was pounding so hard she could hear the blood in her ears. He was logged into a complex interface she didn't recognize. It wasn't email or a social media site. It was a cryptocurrency exchange. On the screen was a list of transactions, long strings of alphanumeric characters. He was moving money, her money, and likely the money of others, through a labyrinth of digital wallets. She knew she had only seconds. She couldn't write it down. He would see the paper, the pen. She did the only thing she could. She used the doctor's mind, the one trained to memorize complex anatomical terms and pharmacological data. She picked a single, long transaction ID from the middle of the screen and burned it into her memory. She repeated it to herself over and over, committing the random sequence of 34 characters to long-term recall. She walked out of the room just as the shower turned off. He emerged, wrapped in a towel, smiling. He suspected nothing. The mask had not dropped, but Alaina could now see the monster beneath it. That night, she devised a plan. She knew she needed help, but she couldn't go to the police yet. What would she tell them? That her handsome, charming boyfriend, who everyone saw as a perfect gentleman, had scammed her. They would see it as a civil matter, a romance gone sour. They wouldn't understand the sinister undercurrent she felt, the sense of mortal danger. She needed proof. She needed to get her data to someone who could analyze it. She reactivated an old smartwatch she hadn't worn in years, a simple fitness tracker Ben had given her. It had a basic function that could send pre-programmed text messages to a designated contact. She had set it up years ago to be able to send an "I'm running late" or "call me" message to Sarah. The watch was old enough that Julian had never paid it any attention. He saw it as a simple piece of jewelry. She edited one of the pre-programmed messages. It was a painstaking process, using the tiny interface. She replaced the text with the 34-character transaction ID she had memorized. The next day, feigning a headache, she said she was going to take a nap. In the privacy of her bedroom, she took a deep breath, and with a trembling finger, sent the cryptic message to Sarah Jenkins. Sarah was in the middle of a lecture when her phone buzzed. She glanced at it and saw the message from Alaina. It wasn't words. It was a jumble of letters and numbers. 4AG8PL 2QT7 RV9SYC E3 WFZH 6JK 5M N1 BXOD2. It made no sense. She texted back, "Did you mean to send this? But dial." Alaina, seeing the reply on her watch, felt a surge of panic. She couldn't reply again. Julian was in the house. She had to trust that Sarah would understand it wasn't a mistake. Sarah stared at the message. It wasn't a butt dial. It was too long, too specific. And it came from Alaina, who was meticulous and precise. This was a signal. Knowing her friend's recent anxieties about Julian, Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. This was a message in a bottle. She didn't know what it meant, but she knew it was important. She immediately left her lecture, her mind racing. She didn't go to the police. She went to the one person she knew who might understand the digital world better than anyone. Her brother, a cybersecurity analyst for a major bank. Meanwhile, Julian was growing restless. The Alaina Hayes project had been profitable, but it was nearing its end. He had extracted the maximum amount of liquid cash she was likely to provide without causing a major incident. His protocol was clear. It was time to move on. His mistake was that he had grown comfortable. He liked Alaina's house, her quiet companionship, the easy life. He broke his own rules by staying too long. He began to plan the final act. It was always the same, a romantic getaway, a secluded location, a final, intimate dinner. It was a pattern he had perfected over the years. He told Alaina he wanted to make up for all the stress with the delayed business deal. He had rented a beautiful, isolated cabin in the mountains near Lake Arrowhead for the upcoming weekend, a place where they could be completely alone. "Just us," he said, stroking her hair. "No phones, no internet, just us and the stars. A chance to truly disconnect and reconnect." Alaina heard the words, and a cold dread washed over her. This was it. This was the trap. She knew with absolute certainty that if she went to that cabin with him, she would not come back. The story of Amelia Vance, the woman whose purse had been found in the Angeles National Forest months earlier. A local news story Alaina had idly read and forgotten, flashed in her mind. Amelia had also disappeared after telling friends she was going on a romantic weekend trip with a new man she'd met online. Alaina had to get out. But how? He was watching her constantly now. Her feigned contentment had made him relax, but any change in her behavior would alert him. She smiled and agreed, telling him it sounded wonderful, a perfect escape. Inside, her mind was a whirlwind of calculations and escape routes. The day before they were due to leave for the cabin, Alaina put the next phase of her own plan into action. She knew his routine. Every afternoon at 3 o'clock, he went for a long run, a habit he never broke. It was her only window. She called her department head at the hospital, her voice trembling but controlled. She told him she was in a domestic violence situation and needed immediate, discreet help. She explained the basics: the con, her fear, the man in her house. She was not a hysterical victim. She was a doctor reporting a critical situation. Her boss, a man who had known her for a decade, listened without interruption. He didn't question her. He heard the steel in her voice beneath the fear. "Where do you want to go?" he asked simply. "I need to get to the police, but I can't call 911. He monitors everything. I think my phone is compromised. I need a pickup, an unmarked car, at 3:15. At the coffee shop, 2 blocks from my house." "I'll make the call," her boss said. "They'll be there." At 3 o'clock, Julian left for his run, just as she knew he would. The moment the door closed behind him, Alaina moved. She didn't pack a bag. She took nothing but her car keys and the burner phone Julian had insisted she use. A phone she now suspected was bugged. She left her own phone, her wallet, her entire life on the kitchen counter. She walked out of her house, not looking back, and started walking the 2 blocks to the coffee shop. Every step was agony. She expected to hear his footsteps behind her, to feel his hand on her shoulder. She reached the coffee shop, her heart hammering. She walked in, ordered a tea she didn't want, and sat at a table by the window, watching the street. At 3:15 precisely, a plain black Ford sedan pulled up to the curb. A man in a simple suit got out of the passenger side and made eye contact with her through the window. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. Alaina left the full cup of tea on the table, walked out the door, got into the back of the car, and it pulled away from the curb. She was out. She was safe. But the real battle had just begun. In the back of the car, she finally broke down, the months of terror and calculated control giving way to shuddering sobs. The detective in the front seat, a man named Miles Corbin, handed her a bottle of water and let her cry. Corbin was a 15-year veteran of the LAPD's Robbery-Homicide Division. He was a quiet, observant man who had seen the worst of human behavior. He had taken the call from Alaina's boss, and something in the story, the mention of a sophisticated, long-term con, had triggered his instincts. This was more than a simple romance scam. When Alaina had composed herself, she began to talk. She told him everything: the dating app, the perfectly crafted persona, the love bombing, the financial fraud, the red flags she had ignored, her growing suspicion, the cryptocurrency wallet, the planned trip to the cabin. As she spoke, Corbin listened, his expression growing more and more grim. He had heard parts of this story before, not all of it, but pieces. Over the past few years, several women across the state had been reported missing by their families. The patterns were eerily similar. They were all successful, intelligent women in their 30s and 40s. They had all recently started dating a charming new man met online. They had all told friends they were going away for a romantic weekend, and then they had vanished. One of them was Amelia Vance. The cases were cold. The men had used burner phones and fake profiles that were impossible to trace. They left no digital or physical trail. The women simply ceased to exist. Law enforcement had long suspected a serial predator was at work, but they had no leads, no evidence, and no survivors. Until now. "The transaction ID," Corbin said, his voice urgent. "The one you sent your friend. Can you get it for me?" Alaina called Sarah, who had been waiting by her phone in an agony of suspense. Sarah immediately forwarded the cryptic text to Detective Corbin. The investigation, which had been stalled for years, suddenly had its first real lead. Corbin brought the alphanumeric string to the FBI's Regional Computer Forensics Laboratory. The cybercrime agents who looked at it confirmed Alaina's suspicion. It was a transaction hash from a specific, privacy-focused cryptocurrency network. Tracing it would be, in their words, a nightmare. Unlike Bitcoin, this currency was designed for anonymity, routing transactions through a complex series of mixers and relays that deliberately obscured the origin and destination of the funds. But for the first time, they had a starting point. An army of federal agents and forensic accountants began the painstaking process of untangling the digital knot. They worked backwards from the hash, using cutting-edge and highly classified analytical tools to peel back the layers of encryption and misdirection. It was a monumental task, equivalent to finding a single grain of sand on a vast, windswept beach. While the digital team worked, Corbin focused on the physical world. He knew the suspect, who they were still calling Julian, would soon realize Alaina was gone. When he returned from his run to an empty house, he would initially assume she had just stepped out. But as the hours ticked by, his suspicion would grow. When she didn't return by nightfall, he would know the game was up. He would flee. Corbin's team put Alaina's house under covert surveillance. They watched as just after sunset, a man matching Julian's description emerged from the house, carrying a single duffel bag. He did not get into the vintage Land Rover he often drove. A car Corbin's team quickly discovered was a short-term rental. Instead, he walked 2 blocks in the opposite direction and got into a nondescript Toyota Camry. He drove calmly, obeying all traffic laws, and merged onto the freeway, heading east. The police followed at a distance. They didn't arrest him, not yet. They had a strong suspicion, but they didn't have enough to tie him directly to the disappearances of the other women. A romance scam was one thing. Proving serial murder was another. They needed more. They needed to know who he really was and where he was going. They followed him for 200 miles across the desert to a remote, fortified compound just outside of Las Vegas, Nevada. The property was registered to a man named Marcus Thorne. A background check revealed a man who, on paper, was a ghost. He had no credit history, no tax records, no social media. He paid for everything in cash or cryptocurrency. He was 45 years old, with a sealed juvenile record and a brief early marriage that had ended in a contentious divorce 20 years ago. Corbin's team immediately sought out the ex-wife. They found her living a quiet life in suburban Oregon. At first, she was reluctant to talk. The marriage was a dark chapter she had long since closed. But when the investigators explained the gravity of the situation, she opened up. Her testimony was chilling. She described Marcus Thorne not as a man, but as a void. He was superficially charming, intelligent, and funny. But underneath, there was nothing. No empathy, no guilt, no real emotion. It was like living with a robot that had learned to mimic human feelings, she said, her voice trembling. He was obsessed with control. He controlled what I wore, who I talked to, how I spent my money. He used to say that people were just puppets, and the secret to life was learning how to pull the strings. She told them about his disturbing interests. He was a voracious reader of true crime, not out of a sense of justice, but as a student. He would analyze cases, pointing out the mistakes the killers had made. He was particularly fascinated by serial predators who used charm to lure their victims. He once told her, in a moment, she had tried for 20 years to forget. The perfect crime is not about being invisible. It's about creating a reality so convincing that no one ever looks for the crime in the first place. The ex-wife's testimony was the final piece of the psychological puzzle. It confirmed what the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit had already profiled. Their suspect was a textbook psychopath with extreme narcissistic and antisocial traits. He was not motivated by money. The money was just a tool, a way of testing his victim's compliance. His true motivation was power, control, and a godlike sense of superiority derived from his ability to manipulate and extinguish the lives of intelligent, powerful women. The ex-wife's statement gave them the probable cause they needed. Simultaneously, the FBI cybercrime unit had a breakthrough. After days of relentless work, they had managed to de-anonymize a single node in the cryptocurrency transaction chain. It led them to an IP address registered to a satellite internet provider, which in turn serviced a single remote address: Marcus Thorne's compound in the Nevada desert. The digital trail and the physical surveillance had converged on the same man. The raid was set for dawn. A heavily armed SWAT team, comprised of both FBI agents and Las Vegas Metro officers, descended on the isolated compound. They used a battering ram to breach the reinforced front door, throwing flashbang grenades into the house. Marcus Thorne was taken completely by surprise. They found him in his home office, sitting in front of a bank of computer monitors. He did not resist. As the tactical officers swarmed in, he simply raised his hands, a calm, almost smug smile on his face. He was taken into custody without a single shot being fired. The chameleon had been unmasked. The search of Thorne's desert lair was a journey into the heart of a meticulously organized predator. The house was not a home. It was a workshop. One room, which the press would later dub the trophy room, contained the horrifying proof of his crimes. On shelves lining the walls were dozens of small, clear plastic boxes. Each box was neatly labeled, not with a name, but with a date and a location. Inside each box was a personal item: a piece of jewelry, a driver's license, a single earring, a university graduation ring. They were trophies, mementos of the lives he had taken. One box, labeled Angelus NF 10.14, contained a silver locket. Detective Corbin opened it. Inside was a tiny photo of Amelia Vance, smiling with her family. On another shelf was a box labeled Pasadena in progress. It was empty. It was the box he had prepared for Alaina Hayes. The digital evidence was even more damning. His hard drives contained thousands of files. There were spreadsheets detailing his finances, tracking the money he had stolen from his victims. But the most terrifying discovery was what investigators called the playbooks for each potential victim, and there were hundreds of women he had stalked and researched. He had created a detailed dossier. He had harvested information from their social media, their professional websites, their online publications. He knew their hopes, their fears, their recent heartbreaks, their political leanings, their favorite books. Based on this research, he would craft a custom-made persona, a Julian or a David or a Robert, complete with a fabricated backstory, profession, and set of interests designed to be the perfect match. He had a library of stolen photographs of handsome men to populate his fake dating profiles. It was a staggering industrial-scale operation of deception and psychological warfare. In a locked folder, they found his journals. They were not diaries of emotion, but cold, clinical logs. He wrote in the third person, referring to himself as the operator. He documented his methods, his successes, and his subjects' reactions with a chilling detachment. He critiqued his own performance, noting where he could have been more convincing, more efficient. It was the work of a man who saw human lives as a complex game that he had mastered. When confronted with the overwhelming evidence, the trophies, the digital playbooks, and most importantly, the living testimony of Alaina Hayes, Marcus Thorne's composure finally cracked, but not in the way investigators expected. He did not break down in remorse. He began to boast. Over the course of a 48-hour interrogation, he gave a full and detailed confession. He spoke without emotion, without remorse, describing his crimes with the clinical pride of an artist discussing his masterpieces. He saw his confession not as a surrender, but as his final performance. He wanted the world to know how brilliant he was. He admitted to the murders of 8 women across 4 states over a period of 10 years. Amelia Vance was his most recent victim before he had targeted Alaina. The stories were all brutally the same. He would lure them to a secluded location, drug them, and then, once they were incapacitated, he would strangle them. He referred to it as switching them off. The method was chosen for its intimacy and its assertion of absolute power. His motive was exactly what the profilers and his ex-wife had suspected: a profound, psychopathic need for control. These were powerful women, he told the detectives, a gleam in his eye. Doctors, lawyers, executives. They thought they were in charge of their own lives. I showed them they weren't. For a little while, I was the most important person in their world. I was their hope, their love, their future. And then I was their end. I was their God. Faced with the prospect of the death penalty in Nevada, Thorne's lawyer negotiated a plea agreement. In exchange for taking capital punishment off the table, Marcus Thorne would plead guilty to all 8 murders and lead investigators to the locations of his victims' bodies. For the families who had spent years in the agonizing limbo of not knowing, it was the only form of closure they could hope for. The recovery process was a grim, multi-state procession. Led by a shackled but still arrogant Marcus Thorne, teams of FBI agents and local police fanned out across the remote deserts and forests of the American West. One by one, he pointed them to the shallow, unmarked graves. He remembered every location with perfect clarity. They found Amelia Vance in a desolate stretch of the Mojave Desert, hundreds of miles from where her purse had been discovered. They found a lawyer from Arizona, a software engineer from Utah, a teacher from Colorado. They were all brought home, finally, to their grieving families. The sentencing hearing was a media spectacle, but for the families in the courtroom, it was a day of profound and painful catharsis. One by one, they stood before the man who had stolen their daughters, their sisters, their mothers, and they read their victim impact statements. Amelia Vance's mother stood holding up a photo of her daughter. "You did not take a subject," she said, her voice shaking with rage and grief. "You took our light. You took family holidays and future grandchildren and a brilliant, kind soul. But you do not win. Her memory, her light, is stronger than your darkness. You will be forgotten in a prison cell, but she will be loved forever." The final statement came from Alaina Hayes. She did not stand as a victim. She stood as a survivor, an agent of justice. She looked directly at Marcus Thorne, her expression not of fear, but of pity and contempt. "You told your interrogators that you were a god," she began, her voice clear and strong, resonating through the silent courtroom. "You saw us as puppets, and you as the puppet master. But you made a mistake. You underestimated your subject. You thought my compassion was a weakness you could exploit, but in the end, it was my strength. It's the source of the resilience that allowed me to see you for the empty, pathetic thing you are." She continued, "You are not a god. You are a parasite. You feed on the hope and goodness of others because you have none of your own. You didn't show me I wasn't in control. You showed me that I was. I controlled my fear. I controlled my mind. I outthought you, and I outplayed you. Your playbook had no chapter for a woman who refused to be your victim. I wrote that chapter myself, and my story does not end with you. It begins." The judge, a veteran jurist who had presided over hundreds of murder trials, seemed visibly moved. Before delivering the sentence, he spoke directly to Thorne. "You have been described as a chameleon, a predator, a monster," the judge said, his voice dripping with scorn. "But I see you as nothing more than a black hole of narcissism. You are a testament to the fact that intelligence without empathy is the most dangerous poison on this earth. You have forfeited your right to ever walk among decent human beings again. Marcus Thorne was sentenced to 8 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole, one for each woman he had murdered, plus an additional 20 years for the fraud and kidnapping of Alaina Hayes. He was sent to ADX Florence, the federal supermax prison in Colorado, a facility designed to hold the most dangerous criminals in the country. He would spend the rest of his life in a concrete cell, in solitary confinement for 23 hours a day. The puppet master had his strings cut permanently. The funeral for Amelia Vance was held a month later. It was not just a service of mourning, but a celebration of the vibrant life she had lived. Hundreds of people filled the church. Friends, family, colleagues from the architecture firm where she had been a rising star. They spoke of her infectious laugh, her fierce loyalty, her passion for designing beautiful, sustainable buildings. After years of uncertainty, her family could finally lay her to rest, an act of closure that was both heartbreaking and necessary. But the story did not end with a funeral and a prison sentence. Alaina Hayes, true to her word, ensured that her ordeal would not be just a horrific footnote in criminal history, but a catalyst for change. She resigned from her position at the hospital, recognizing that she could no longer be the physician she once was. Her trauma had changed her, but it had also given her a new, powerful sense of purpose. With the remainder of Ben's inheritance and a significant portion of her own savings, she established the Hayes Foundation for Digital Safety. It was not a memorial fund for victims, but a proactive, aggressive advocacy group. Its mission was twofold: to educate the public about the sophisticated methods of online predators, and to hold the tech industry accountable for the safety of their users. Alaina became a powerful public speaker and a relentless lobbyist. She worked with former law enforcement officials, cybersecurity experts, and psychologists to develop a new curriculum for digital literacy, teaching people how to spot the red flags of manipulative online behavior, the love bombing, the crafted personas, the excuses for avoiding video calls. Her foundation partnered with major dating app companies. At first, they were resistant, fearing that acknowledging the danger would scare away users. But Alaina's story was too compelling, her advocacy too relentless. Under immense public pressure, the industry began to change. Lux Connect, the app where she met Thorne, went out of business. Other, larger platforms implemented new safety features that the Hayes Foundation had championed. Mandatory video verification to prove a user is who their pictures claim to be. AI-powered algorithms to detect suspicious language patterns associated with romance scams, and prominent, easy-to-use panic buttons within the app to alert law enforcement. On a national level, Alaina worked with a bipartisan group of lawmakers to draft and pass new legislation. Known as Alaina's Law, the bill provided significant federal funding for FBI and local law enforcement cybercrime units that specialized in tracking and apprehending online predators. It streamlined the process for getting warrants for digital evidence and created a national database to track patterns in romance fraud and online disappearances, connecting cases across state lines that might have otherwise remained isolated and cold. The case of the chameleon killer, as the media dubbed Marcus Thorne, became a cultural touchstone. Documentaries were produced, podcasts were downloaded by millions, and the story served as a stark, cautionary tale for the digital age. It highlighted the dark side of our hyper-connected world, where intimacy can be manufactured and trust can be weaponized. Marcus Thorne lives out his days in the sterile silence of his concrete cell. He has become a subject of intense interest for forensic psychologists and criminologists who study him as a perfect specimen of psychopathy. He grants them interviews, still performing, still trying to convince them of his brilliance. But his audience is gone. His power is gone. He is just a man in a box, a footnote in the textbooks he once studied. He is unremorseful, narcissistic to the end, a ghost in the machine he tried to master. The final moral of this story is not one of fear, but of vigilance. It is a reminder that in an age of curated profiles and digital illusions, the greatest vulnerability is the desire to believe in a story that is too good to be true. Marcus Thorne was not a supernatural monster. He was a man who understood and exploited a fundamental human need for connection. His victims were not foolish or naive. They were hopeful, trusting, and intelligent people who fell prey to a level of deception that few could comprehend. But the story's ultimate legacy belongs to Alaina Hayes. She took the darkest experience of her life and forged it into a shield for others. She transformed her personal trauma into public service, her pain into a movement for systemic change. Her story serves as a powerful testament to the resilience of the human spirit. It demonstrates that true strength is not the absence of fear, but the ability to think and act in the face of it. She was hunted, but she refused to be prey. She was targeted, but she refused to be a victim. In the end, the doctor, the healer, did what she had always done. She found a way to turn a story of death into a lesson for the living, ensuring that the women Marcus Thorne tried to erase would instead be the reason that so many others were saved. Her legacy is not one of victimhood, but of victory.